Hi everyone, Some Gamer Dude here. A little while ago, I got a request to review the Caster Chronicles, the second game published by Force of Will Co., announced with the never-published Architect. I'd intended to give Casters a proper look for quite some time, but that request put it on the shortlist, eventually gaining priority. The goal of the Caster Chronicles is something we see a lot. The game uses the shield system. At the start of the game, both players set aside 7 cards as their orbs. Once you corrupt all of your opponent's orbs and you attack them directly, you win the game. The theme of the Caster Chronicles is strongly tied to the cards, arguably more so than other similar games. This starts with the resource card, the Caster. The Caster card represents a girl from a Japanese girls' academy who made a contract with demons that control the school, in turn making them a magical girl. I think the reference is fairly obvious. It's Madoka Magica. The girls are broken up into 7 colours, later 8, the original 7 representing the 7 deadly sins. The reasoning behind you having more than one caster card is that as you defeat the other girls, you collect their caster cards. The manga created for the website calls this out as a Yokai Watch reference, though it's also similar to Metabots. The caster card itself has some rather interesting quirks. As you'd expect, you can tap them for their resource, here called Aether, but the girls themselves have effects, typically tap effects. This has some interesting influences over gameplay I'll talk about later. All of the girls are unique entities. You can only have one of each out. Finally, the girls can level up. Typical evolution mechanics stacking cards, though seeing it on a resource is quite unusual. When you may play a resource, you can place the higher level one over the lower level one of the same name. Casters produce resources equal to their level, so a level 3 Passion Ring produces 3 Ignis, aka Rage, resources. Effects improve on the level 2 when compared to the level 1, with the level 3 being a pushed card. The second type of card is the Servant, your creature equivalent. The context is fairly clear. The girls summon these entities and they serve the girls. The servants have different themes depending on their sin identity. So gluttony has a lot of foods, and anger has a lot of flame themes. The servants have some very interesting mechanical quirks to them like the casters do, but I'll get to that when we get into gameplay. The third card type is the Conjure, your spell equivalent. The only thing of note here is that Casters uses the same system as Force of Will, where the card is sorcery speed on base, but becomes instant with the keyword Quick Cast. The fourth card type is Barrier. This is your enchantment card type. But due to the casters being activated abilities, these are all continuous abilities that would otherwise be too strong on a caster. The Caster Chronicles has 2 additional card types I didn't get to play with. The first is Soulbond Servants, which serve as a combination of the fusion and Xyz summons from Yu-Gi-Oh! You may overlay the components listed beneath the name on the top of the card as a stack from your hand or board, then summon the Soul-Bonded Servant. The Soul-Bonded Servants have a keyword called Soul Seal, which is essentially a combination of Soul Guard from Buddy Fight and the Xyz component mechanic from Yu-Gi-Oh! The cards underneath your Soul-Bonded Servant are called Stock, and when your Soul-Bonded Servant would die, discard a Stock instead. You can also discard a Stock to reuse the Enter effect of the Soul-Bonded Servant. I don't know why caster fusions were considered to be a good idea, or how it fits the theme of the game, but it seems fine. The second isn't explained anywhere. The cards don't have their type on the card, but seem to be an additional enchantment type card called Deity. 1 for each attribute. When they come in, you gain 1 counter for every caster you have of their type, and you pay those counters for their effects. I can't fathom why it doesn't have a small article to explain how to use the card, whether it's an extra deck mechanic or not, but neither the rules nor the CRD explain it either. It's not the only thing that isn't adequately explained regarding the game too. Like the soul bond, I'm not sure how deities fit in either. If the casters are making pacts with the demons, why would gods come to help them? Are they evil gods? There isn't law to explain this, and it seems from flavor text to be an additional pact. A game of casters starts very much like every other game utilizing the shield system. Shuffle your deck, here it's a static 50 cards, decide who goes first randomly, deal yourself a 7-card hand, set aside 7 cards face down as orbs, then mulligan by putting any cards you don't want on the bottom of your deck, then drawing the same amount. The player going second gets this game's version of the will coin from Force of Will. In casters, the Aether coin produces colourless Aether. At the start of your turn, you recover all of your rested cards by setting them to the portrait orientation. Then, if it's not the first turn of the game, draw a card. Next, you may call a caster. This comes with stipulations and leniencies. As I said when going over the caster cards, you can only call a caster you don't already have in play. So if you have Glory Butterfly out, you can't call another Glory Butterfly. You can, however, place any card from your hand face down as a colourless resource, here called Void like Force of Will. This means excess copies have uses, and if you don't have a caster, you don't fall back on the resource race. Finally, you can level up a caster by stacking it on a caster with the same name, one level lower. One little note with level 2 casters. Many say you can banish a card with the same name for an effect, so a level 2 Passion Wing banishes a Passion Wing. This refers to both the level underneath, which would be expected, but also any face-down casters of that name. Face-down casters keep their name, but aren't considered another copy in play. Its nature is hidden information from everyone but its owner. Next up is the main phase. You may play a Servant, Conjure, or Barrier. To play a card, you pay Aether equal to its cost, with at least one Aether being of the same attribute. So say you play an Ignis card. You need at least one Ignis Aether. Conjure and Barrier cards are bog standard. Cast the Conjure, do what it says, send it to the graveyard. Cast the Barrier, place it into play. Servants are a mite bit different from the norm though. Servants have 2 orientations they can be summoned in. Your standard portrait orientation ready to be used, and upside down, here called reverse. You can fairly change servants between the 2 orientations, but not from or to the landscape rest orientation. To explain this, let's move on to the battle phase. While the first turn player cannot attack, the Caster Chronicles lacks both Summoning Sickness and has a rule where every recovered servant must attack each turn. Also, servants can attack enemy servants. No keywords or specific positioning required. Standard fare to start with. Tap your servant, designate a target. If it's a non-reverse servant and the attacker's attack is higher than the target's attack, the target dies. Otherwise, nothing happens. If you attack your opponent, corrupt an orb. Exact same concept as shields. The orb is sent to their hand. If it has break, another keyword taken directly from Force of Will, they may cast it for free. The game also includes double and triple corrupt, same as Duel Masters and its double and triple breaker. Corrupts that many orbs. Like Duel Masters, they are all sent to the hand at once, not one by one like Chrono Clash or Digimon. However, you can't always attack your opponent. If they have a reverse servant, it must be dealt with first. In a battle against a reversed servant, the attacker's attack must be higher than the target's defense, otherwise nothing happens. Then it's just the end phase, floating Aether dissipates, end of turn effects are used. I have many feelings towards the Caster Chronicles, about the presentation, about the mechanics, about the cards, and about how the game developed. I think it's best to start with the elephant in the room. The cards in the Caster Chronicles can look like this. Cutesy, sexy, buxom, skin showing. They attract a certain type of male. The type of person who would enjoy Vanguard's Bermuda Triangle for the art. Act in a certain way, and those people can be quite uncomfortable to be around. The chase cards also look like this, which is censored compared to the Japanese version. Even if some could enjoy it for the gameplay, they might steer clear, as they would assume others would believe them to be perverted for taking part in the game. Stores might see it as inappropriate and refuse to carry it, let alone hold events. I was very much of this mindset originally, and I'm not sure what changed, but I found myself not really caring over time. I probably just got over it, started looking at the art for what it really was, and became more interested in the gameplay side of things. I do believe my attitudes have changed over time. The importance I put upon art has greatly diminished. So allow me to play devil's advocate for a moment. What is really all that bad about the Caster Chronicles art? The chase art? It's straight up magical girl transformation. The use of skin tone is a bit more risque than normal for this type of scene, but it's normal for these transformations to be nude with no overt sexual characteristics, like a doll. That's all this art is, nude dolls. I wouldn't call most of the art sexual in nature either. The few that are really aren't the worst things in the world either. It's not pornographic in nature, just arguably a little inappropriate. But you don't need them. The chase cards are trophies, not game pieces. Despite the fact they can be used as game pieces, they are not unique cards. If the store likes, they could ban the chase cards from use. Once you get away from that to the normal cards, I wouldn't call the cards sexualized. Yes, skin showing can be perceived as sexualization, but the posing isn't sexual in nature. It's just skin. There are no sexual parts of the body on display. I looked through all the casters and many of the servants. I didn't see much of anything that I felt was wildly inappropriate. The Caster Chronicles was a game aimed at girls, and I have it on good authority that many of the original people behind the game were women. This should be unsurprising, as there is a crossover between what women traditionally viewed as aspirational and what males viewed as desirable. You will also notice in the first season that the casters themselves are closer to dress-up concepts, especially the main caster, Tsubasa Koga, aka Passion Wing, rather than the scantily clad designs of Season 2. Your mileage will vary on the art, but my take is that the reaction to casters, even from myself, was overblown and not proportionate to what was originally being done. While not what I personally would gravitate towards producing, and yes, I would feel a tad embarrassed playing it in public, I don't think it's quite as bad as the reaction would lead you to believe. I don't think it's fully appropriate, but at the same time, and I hate to do this, I'm very much on the fence here. If you told me it made you feel uncomfortable, I'd get it. But I would point out how much worse it could be, and that the posing isn't sexual. I'm just not bothered either way. It is what it is. We can all make our judgments of the people a little too into it. We all know the type. I just don't care either way. The Caster Chronicles has some rather interesting ideas on the mechanical side of things. The reverse orientation interests me in particular. If you've followed this channel for a while, you'll know one of my biggest issues with the Chrono Clash system was the keyword Sentinel. Battlers with Sentinel came out tapped, and while tapped, they magnetized direct attacks towards them. These cards were hard to maintain, as they have to attack to remain tapped, and that runs the risk of hitting either a battler with the same or higher power, or a guardian effect that would kill it. It really surprised me that casters answered every problem with the Sentinel mechanic before Chrono Clash was even printed, and it was so simple. A third orientation that doesn't recover. Felt good, I liked it. I'd like to see this mechanic used again. I have very mixed feelings towards the casters themselves. I like the concept of the casters being unique cards with effects, and those effects are all limit 1 per turn cycle. But it did feel unbalanced. Of particular note, Flame Rouge in Ignis. I slam into a servant, kill it, then just tap her and draw 1. I take my opponent down 1, I pay 1, more or less, to go up 1. It's a 2-card swing. If the defense boosting Glory Butterfly is in play, it's not going to be able to compete with the power increase of Kindle the Spirit, a 1-cost conjure that gives the servant plus 2000 attack for the turn. You can really easily put the pinch on your opponent. This is where I don't like the battle system. I think it really is too easy to dominate your opponent's board with aggression. The game does very much benefit from aggressive tactics. Sherry Angelica has a similar effect where she draws you a card if you corrupt an orb, but I felt Flame Rouge to be a very viable strategy with the initial starter decks. I think the lack of summoning sickness and the ability to attack anything contribute to this. I believe both to be mistakes. I also think that the conjures have to be overpowered to counterbalance the casters themselves. It's this weird juxtaposition. They don't feel as useful as the casters most of the time, but when they are useful, they feel too useful. They feel more situational than other games. The combination of the casters and servants feels very complete by itself. I'm not sure the conjures were even needed. On face value, I love the themes of the game. I think the idea of the 7 deadly sins as the colour pie is inspired, and a lot could be done with it. I don't think casters did it justice. Firstly, it hides the theme behind the lore on the website, instead using terms such as Ignis, Solus, Luna, and Terra for gameplay. I don't know why they couldn't use Rage, Wrath, Sloth, or even the Latin for these names. Most people don't even know about the theming until they look it up. The website doesn't even state the themes for all of them. Only the fan wikia does, something I believe to have been deciphered from the boss monsters in each attribute being one of the demons associated with the sin, though not all of them use the correct name. Secondly, I don't think the mechanics fit the themes terribly well. Some feel off, like they're doing things they shouldn't, or are doing too much. To go back to my previous talk about Ignis, Rage, it's doing too much. I don't get why Rage draws, kills, or even has defensive cards, when what Rage really invokes is a very combat-themed colour. On the flip side, why is Gluttony the hand discard colour? What does that have to do with overindulging? Greed feels like the combat colour, and I'm not even sure what Pride's theme actually is. This isn't to say Caster's colour pie is a mess. It just needed more vision and adherence to the established themes. The flavour isn't very well conveyed in the cards. In a rather interesting note, the Japanese game does not seem to have the 7 deadly sin theme. The same page on the Japanese side doesn't mention it. Not only this, but the names of the attributes seem to differ, quite considerably too. What we call the Pride-themed attribute, Terra, is Saturn in Japanese. The attributes use a modern planetary body name: Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, and Venus. The deity cards in English use these names, and the demons in the first set use their proper names in the Japanese version, which I also found interesting. When I was gearing up to playtest the Caster Chronicles, I was told I needed to compare Season 1 to Season 2. Barely a year into the Caster Chronicles' existence, it changed hands. No longer was it a Force of Will Co. product. It was now published by a company called TCG Co., the most generic name possible for a company. Just short of a year after this, the game starts its Season 2, or as we'd commonly call it, a new block. But from this point the game essentially becomes an indie production, with 4 to 5 months between products, the game now being in Japanese only, and the last Japanese product being in November 2020 with no upcoming sets. I was told between the two blocks, not only did the company change, but the dev team behind it, and with that, design sensibilities. For the sake of comprehensiveness, we played with the Angel vs. Demon and another vs. Aqua dual decks. The Angel vs. Demon decks are in the vein of the second set from just over a year earlier, the cards being broken into two factions. The difference being that in the Angel and the Demon archetypes, the casters themselves do not care about balance or colour identity. So long as you're producing for an Angel or a Demon, depending on whichever deck you choose to play, your casters produce whatever colour you need. Decks now literally do everything, only limited by what cards are Angels or Demons, and that includes conjures, which have been given types with this expansion. This is the second point left unexplained, both by the sites and the CRD, whether the versions of characters are considered separate entities or not. The version identifier is in a type of bracket, and in my opinion, it's unclear whether it's part of the name or reminder text. Nevertheless, the decks are very samey, and the experience was horribly boring. There was no real flavour to speak of, and it was just going by the numbers, do everything. Another is the 8th colour that was introduced, colourless. I have very mixed feelings towards another. On the one hand, what were they thinking? How does this exactly fit? What is the flavour here? The casters are all themed after Arthurian legends gone insane, while the servants are Cthulhu and random Yamato no Orochi. The best that I can gather is that the casters have contracts with Cthulhu entities rather than demons, and like medieval recreation. Also, Orochi is here for some reason. On the other hand, another is probably the best designed colour. The identity is very clear. It ramps a bit by putting cards face down into your caster area, is mechanically themed around voiding your casters by turning them face down, and has a bit of losing resources to gain or protect orbs. Its main play is to buy time till it unleashes a Cthulhu bomb. I can't think of another colour in the game whose identity is as clear as this. The big problem is, I was bored of the game by this point, and didn't enjoy Void vs. Aqua either. After a couple of days of playing casters to get a good taste of it, I'd had enough, and I wasn't the only one. The person I was playing with was rather tired of it too. The Caster Chronicles has a lot of great ideas. I like the concepts of the casters, reverse, and the 7 deadly sins. Those ideas stand out a lot. The game's pacing is just too fast. It's too aggro-friendly. Games are very samey, even with different colour identities. Colour identity is both weak and unfocused. Playing different decks didn't feel like different experiences. Even when you remove whatever grievances you may or may not have regarding the art, I don't think the game lives up to its potential. The base rule set has issues. I don't think you should be able to attack recovered servants like you can. I don't think you should be forced to attack. And I do think summoning sickness should be here. The website and CRD needed more maintenance. I shouldn't be trying to decipher card types and their uses, or whether factions are part of the name or not. I have issues regarding the card design. While I like the casters conceptually, I think they cause balance issues regarding conjures. Conjures have to be too strong to compete. Casters are conjures with infinite uses, for one. It's hard to compete with that. Colour identity needed to be better fitting, stronger, and more obvious. The game as a whole needed better direction. Casters is not the worst game I've played for the channel, but I don't lament the fact I never bought it. I suspect you would need house rules and errata to make it play better than it does, and even then, there is still a lot left to be desired. This has been some Gamer Dude, and thanks for watching.